The rain came down in thin, icy needles, tapping against the cracked sidewalk like quiet accusations.
Here, let me take
Beneath
that.
a flickering
Careful, it's
streetlight,
still warm.
a man sat
Thanks,
hunched
I
on a
appreciate
bench,
it.
his coat too thin for the cold, his shoes worn past dignity. Most people passed him without slowing, eyes fixed forward, hands deep in pockets. He stared at the blur of umbrellas and headlights, breathing shallowly, as if he were trying to take up as little space in the world as possible. No one would ever guess that behind the untrimmed beard and hollow gaze lived a man who once owned boardrooms, towers of glass, and more money than he could count. Before we go any further, tell me something. Where are you watching from right now? It still amazes me how a single story can travel across cities, countries, even continents. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this moment of kindness can reach.
Here, let me
Ethan
take
Cole
that.
pulled his coat
Careful, it's
tighter,
still warm.
fingers numb,
Thanks, I
stomach
appreciate it.
aching with a hunger he hadn't felt in decades. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad luck. This was a choice. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan had been standing in a penthouse office overlooking the city, listening to executives argue about margins and mergers. His reflection in the glass looked sharp, powerful, and empty. The numbers no longer meant anything. Not after the letter. Not after the funeral. Not after he realized that when everything was stripped away, he didn't know who he really was anymore. So he vanished. No assistance. No security. No credit cards. Just cash, a cheap phone, and a single rule for himself. Live as the world sees the poor. Feel what they
Here, let me
feel.
take that.
Be invisible.
Careful, it's still warm.
Tonight,
Thanks, I
invisibility
appreciate it.
burned. The bench creaked as someone sat down beside him. Ethan stiffened, instinctively bracing for suspicion or contempt. Instead, a soft voice spoke. He looks cold. Ethan turned slightly. A woman in her early 30s stood nearby, holding the hand of a little girl with dark curls peeking out from under a pink knit hat. The woman's coat was frayed at the cuffs, her shoes practical but worn. Tired eyes but kind ones. The woman hesitated. "Sweetheart, we don't know." "But he's shaking," the girl whispered, loud enough to hear. Ethan hadn't realized he was. The woman sighed, a quiet surrender, then stepped closer. "Sir?" Her voice
Here, let
was
me take
gentle,
that.
cautious.
Careful, it's still
Are
warm.
you
Thanks,
okay?
I appreciate it.
He swallowed. Pride rose in his throat, sharp and bitter. 1,000 rehearsed lies hovered on his tongue. "Just resting," he said finally. The girl tugged her mother's sleeve. "Can we give him the soup?" The woman looked down at the small paper bag in her hand. Ethan caught the smell then. Chicken broth, warm and comforting, like another lifetime. The woman hesitated only a second longer before nodding. She held the bag out to him. "We don't have much, but it's hot. You should have it." Ethan stared at the bag. Something inside his chest cracked, slow and painful. I can't." The girl stepped forward and placed it on the bench beside him anyway. "Please,"
Here, let
she
me
said
take that.
simply.
Careful,
He took
it's
it.
still warm.
His hands shook
Thanks,
as he
I
opened the
appreciate
lid, steam curling into the cold air. The first sip burned his tongue, but he welcomed it. Warmth spread through him, down into places that had been frozen for years. "Thank you," he murmured. The woman smiled, small but sincere. "Take care of yourself." They started to walk away, the girl glancing back once, waving shyly. Ethan watched them disappear into the rain, the world suddenly quieter, heavier. If you were standing there watching that moment unfold, what would you have done? Would you have stopped, or kept walking? Be honest, tell me in the comments. And if this small act of kindness touched you even a little, tap like to show that compassion still matters. Ethan sat there long
Here, let me
after the
take
soup
that.
was gone,
Careful,
the
it's
empty
still warm.
container resting in
Thanks,
his
I
lap
appreciate
like
it.
something sacred. He hadn't expected this part, the way kindness from strangers could hurt more than cruelty. Because it reminded him of what he'd lost, and what he'd never truly earned. That night, he followed them at a distance, careful not to be seen. They entered a modest apartment building, paint peeling, hallway lights flickering. Through a thin window, Ethan saw the woman set down her bag, rub her temples, and smile as her daughter chattered about school. Grace and Lily he would learn later. Ethan slept on the bench that night, but for the first time since he'd left his old life, he didn't feel completely alone. Still, as the cold crept back in and the city hummed indifferently around him, a question pressed heavy on
Here,
his
let me take
chest.
that.
one he
Careful,
wasn't
it's
ready to
still
answer
warm.
yet.
Thanks,
What
I
happens when
appreciate it.
kindness meets a truth it was never meant to know? Morning crept in slowly, gray and reluctant. Ethan woke to the sound of traffic and the dull ache in his lower back, the bench unforgiving beneath him. For a brief, disoriented second, he reached for a silk pillow that wasn't there, then reality settled in heavy and cold. He sat up, breath visible in the air, and for the first time in his life, he wondered where his next meal would come from. He thought of the soup, of the girl's small hands, of the way her mother's eyes had held concern without curiosity, kindness without conditions. That memory stayed with him as he walked the streets, past cafes where people laughed over lattes that cost more than his current daily budget.
Here, let me take
Hunger
that.
followed him
Careful,
like a
it's still
shadow,
warm.
but pride
Thanks, I
still
appreciate
clung
it.
stubbornly to his bones. He didn't beg. Not yet. By midday, he found himself outside a public library, drawn in by warmth more than books. Inside, he sat at a corner table, watching people come and go. Students. Elderly couples. A man sleeping upright, chin tucked to chest. Ethan caught his reflection in the darkened screen of a computer. The disguise was working too well. He barely recognized himself. And for the first time, he didn't want to. His mind drifted backward, to the life he'd abandoned. Just months ago, his name alone opened doors. Ethan Cole, billionaire investor, tech visionary, the man who turned risk into fortune.
Here, let me
But
take
none
that.
of the headlines had
Careful, it's
mentioned
still
the
warm.
hospital room.
Thanks, I appreciate
None had
it.
mentioned the steady beep of machines, or the way his wife's hand had gone slack in his. Emily had been warmth. Laughter. The one person who never treated him like a balance sheet. Cancer didn't care about wealth. He remembered promising her everything would be okay, even when the doctor's eyes said otherwise. He remembered standing alone after the funeral, surrounded by flowers and silence, realizing that none of his success had taught him how to survive grief. That was when the question began to gnaw at him. If all this money couldn't buy kindness, did he even deserve it? The library closed early. Outside, the cold greeted him again. He wandered without aim until a familiar voice stopped him. "Hey, it's you."
Here, let me take
Grace
that.
stood a few
Careful,
steps
it's still
away,
warm.
holding Lily's
Thanks, I
backpack in
appreciate
one
it.
hand, groceries in the other. Surprise flickered across her face, then concern. "You're still out here?" Ethan nodded, embarrassed. "Seems so." Lily peeked out from behind her mother, eyes bright. "Mom, it's the soup man." Grace winced softly. "Lily." "It's okay," Ethan said quickly, forcing a smile. "I like that name." Grace hesitated, then shifted the grocery bag to her other arm. "We're just heading home. It's cold, you shouldn't be out here." "I'll manage." She studied him as if weighing something invisible. "We don't have much," she said slowly, "but I can make extra rice tonight. It's not fancy, but you're welcome
Here,
to
let me
join
take
us."
that.
Careful,
The
it's
words
still
landed
warm.
harder than
Thanks,
any
I
boardroom
appreciate it.
confrontation ever had. Ethan's instincts screamed no. Lines blurred in his mind. Boundaries, dignity, the fear of being seen. But something else spoke louder. Loneliness. "I don't want to impose," he said. Grace smiled gently. "You wouldn't be." Up close, her apartment smelled like detergent and cheap soap, but also something warm, cumin maybe. Lily kicked off her shoes and launched into a story about school, words tumbling over each other. Grace moved quietly, practiced, setting water to boil, scooping rice with careful precision. Ethan sat at the small kitchen table, hands folded, unsure where to look. "You can call me Grace," she said. "This
Here, let me take
chatterbox
that.
is Lily.
Careful, it's still
I'm
warm.
Ethan."
Thanks, I
Lily
appreciate it.
beamed. "Hi, Ethan." Dinner was simple. Lentils. A shared piece of bread torn into careful halves. Yet Ethan had never tasted anything like it. Each bite carried effort. Sacrifice. Grace noticed the way he ate, slowly, almost reverently. "You don't have family around?" she asked gently. Ethan paused. "Not anymore." She nodded, not pressing. "It's hard, doing everything alone." Lily looked up. "Mom does everything." Grace smiled, but her eyes glistened just slightly. "Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? When you least expected it? If yes, write yes in the comments. And if
Here,
you
let
feel
me take
comfortable, tell me
Careful,
their
it's
name.
still warm.
Sometimes
Thanks, I
gratitude
appreciate it.
deserves to be spoken out loud. That night, Ethan lay awake on the floor, wrapped in a thin blanket Grace had insisted he take. The ceiling above him was cracked, but solid. Safer than the bench. His chest felt tight, not from cold, but from the slow realization that these two had less than almost anyone he knew, yet gave without hesitation. And somewhere deep inside him, buried beneath grief and guilt, something stirred, a fragile hope, mixed with fear. Because the more he stayed, the more dangerous the truth became. And soon, that truth would demand to be seen. Days folded into each other quietly. Ethan told himself he would leave after one night. Then two. Then the end of the week.
Careful, it's
but each
still
morning,
warm.
Grace handed him a cup of instant coffee without asking questions, and Lily waved at him like he belonged there, like he'd always been part of their small world. He began helping where he could. Fixing a loose cabinet hinge. Walking Lily to school when Grace worked an early shift at the nursing home. Carrying groceries so Grace's wrist wouldn't ache as badly. They never asked why he was there. They never asked how long he would stay. And somehow, that hurt more than suspicion ever could. One afternoon, Ethan waited outside Lily's classroom as children spilled out, laughter echoing down the hallway. Lily ran to him, backpack bouncing. "Mr. Ethan, we learned about planets today." "Did you?" he said, kneeling. "Which one's your favorite?"
Careful,
"Earth,"
it's still warm.
she replied without hesitation. "Because it's where people are." The simplicity of it stole his breath. As they walked home, Ethan noticed Grace's limp more clearly. Subtle but there. The way she favored one leg when she thought no one was watching. "You're hurt," he said gently. Grace shrugged. "Old injury. Hospital work doesn't exactly forgive the body." That night, as Lily colored at the table, Grace sat across from Ethan, rubbing her ankle. The room was dim, one bulb flickering overhead. "I should tell you something," she said quietly. Ethan looked up. "You don't owe me." "I know," she said, "but I want to." She took a breath. Lily's father left when she was 3. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad.
Careful, it's still
Or
warm.
poor.
Thanks, I
A bitter
appreciate it.
smile crossed her lips. "Some days, I think he just wasn't ready to be kind." Ethan felt the words like a mirror held too close. "I work double shifts when I can," Grace continued. "Still, there are weeks when the math doesn't work. Rent doesn't care how tired you are." He nodded, throat tight. He knew those systems. He'd invested in them. Optimized them. Profited from them. That night, while Grace slept, Ethan sat on the floor staring at his phone. One call could fix everything. One transfer. One name spoken aloud. He didn't make it. Instead, he went out early the next morning, looking for work. Real work. He found day labor hauling boxes at a warehouse.
Let me take that.
The pay
Careful,
was
it's
low.
still warm.
The supervisor
Thanks, I
barely
appreciate
looked
it.
at him. By noon, his hands were blistered, his back screaming. But when he handed Grace a few crumpled bills that evening, her eyes widened. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I wanted to," he replied. Lily clapped. "Mr. Ethan works now." He smiled, then turned away so they wouldn't see his eyes burn. That weekend, something shifted. Grace came home pale, movement stiff. She tried to hide it, but Ethan noticed her breathing, shallow, careful. "I'm fine," she insisted when he asked. She wasn't. By morning, she could barely stand. Ethan insisted on walking Lily to school, then helped Grace to the clinic down the street. The waiting
Here, let
room
me
was
take that.
crowded.
Careful,
Hours
it's still
passed.
warm.
When the
Thanks, I
doctor
appreciate
finally
it.
spoke, his tone was apologetic. "Untreated ligament damage. You've been compensating too long," he said. "You need rest, possibly surgery." Grace laughed once. Sharp, humorless. "That's not an option." Ethan felt something inside him fracture. That evening, Lily sat unusually quiet, swinging her legs from the couch. "Mom's scared," she whispered to Ethan. "I know," he said. "Are you gonna leave?" she asked suddenly. The question hit him harder than any revelation. "No," he said immediately. "I'm right here." She leaned into his side, trusting him completely. "Now let me ask you something, and take a second before answering. What's one small good thing you've done for someone recently, even if no one noticed? Share it in the comments. Sometimes reading kindness reminds us we're not alone, and your story might be exactly what someone needs tonight. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling again, But this time, his heart raced with urgency, not fear. Because Grace needed help. Real help. And for the first time since he'd walked away from his old life, Ethan knew exactly how to give it. The question was no longer if he should reveal the truth. It was how much damage the truth would do when it finally came out. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, a scent Ethan knew too well. He stood beside Grace's bed as monitors hummed softly, Lily asleep in a chair with her head against the mattress, fingers still wrapped around her mother's sleeve. Grace had finally collapsed at work. A nurse had recognized the signs and refused to let her finish the shift. By the time Ethan arrived, Grace was pale, trembling, pain etched into every line of her face. "You should go home," Grace whispered, forcing a smile when she noticed Lily stirring. "You've already done too much." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not going anywhere." The doctor returned with test results, voice careful, measured. "She needs surgery. Sooner rather than later. If she keeps pushing like this, the damage could become permanent." Grace closed her eyes. "I can't afford time off." The doctor hesitated, then nodded, a silent understanding of a system that punished the vulnerable. After they left, silence filled the room. The kind that presses down on your chest. Ethan sat, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at him to fix this the way he always had, decisively, efficiently, with money. But money had conditions. Money had questions. That night, he stepped into the hallway and finally made the call. Not to his board. Not to his lawyer. But to the hospital's billing office. He kept his voice low, steady. He asked about charity care. Payment plans. Grants. The woman on the other end sounded tired, but kind. She gave him numbers. Forms. Waiting lists. When he returned to the room, Grace watched him carefully. "You don't have to play hero," she said softly. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm just here." Days passed in that sterile bubble. Lily did homework at the bedside. Ethan brought coffee for the nurses. Grace slept, then woke, then worried. And Ethan fought himself every minute. Because with one signature, one reveal, he could erase every bill. He could fund the surgery, the recovery, the future. But he remembered the soup. The way Grace had given without knowing who he was. If he revealed himself now, would that kindness still count? The surgery was scheduled for the following week. The cost loomed like a shadow, even with assistance. On the morning of the operation, Grace squeezed Ethan's hand. "Whatever happens, thank you," she said. "For staying." Lily hugged him tight. "Don't go away." "I won't," he promised, though his voice wavered. The surgery took hours. Ethan paced the hallway, heart pounding, memories of another hospital rushing back. Another waiting room, another outcome he couldn't change. When the surgeon finally emerged, mask pulled down, Ethan froze. "She's stable," the doctor said. "Recovery will be long, but she'll walk without pain again." Ethan exhaled, knees weak. Relief crashed over him, followed immediately by dread. Because the bill would come next. Later that night, Grace woke groggy, confused. Ethan sat beside her. The room was dim, quiet. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. She frowned slightly. "You look scared." "I am." He took a breath, the kind that feels like stepping off a cliff. "My name is Ethan Cole. And I haven't been honest about who I am." Grace stared at him, waiting. "I didn't come here looking for help," he continued. "I came looking for truth. I used to be very wealthy." The silence stretched. Lily stirred, half asleep. Grace's expression shifted, confusion, disbelief, then something like hurt. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he whispered, "that I could have paid for everything. And I didn't." The words hung heavy, unforgiving. If that revelation just hit you in the chest, you're not alone. Sometimes a truth hurts because it touches something deep inside us. If you felt it too, leave a red heart, just a small sign that you're still here with them in this moment. Grace turned her face away, tears slipping silently into her pillow. Ethan sat there, exposed, knowing that the greatest risk he'd ever taken wasn't losing his fortune. It was losing the trust of the two people who had saved him without ever knowing his name. Grace didn't speak for a long time. The machines filled the silence with soft, indifferent beeps. Lily shifted in her sleep, unaware that something fragile had just cracked open in the room. Ethan waited. He didn't try to explain further. He didn't defend himself. For the first time in his life, he understood that some truths didn't need polish, they needed patience. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice hoarse. "So all those nights, the warehouse, the blisters on your hands," she swallowed. "Was that real?" "Yes," Ethan said immediately. "Every bit of it." She let out a shaky breath. "Then why?" Her eyes finally met his. Not angry. Worse, wounded. Why pretend to be poor when people like us don't get a choice? The question cut deeper than any accusation. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, shoulders slumped. "Because I didn't trust myself anymore," he said quietly. "I didn't know if I was capable of real kindness, or if I'd just been buying it my whole life." Grace looked away again. "So we were a test?" "No," he said quickly, pain sharp in his chest. "You were a mirror. And I didn't like what I saw." Tears slipped down Grace's cheeks, silent and steady. "Do you know how hard it is," she whispered, "to let someone in when the world keeps proving you wrong?" "I do," Ethan said. "Too late, but I do." She closed her eyes. "I need time." He nodded. "I understand." The next few days were the hardest Ethan had ever lived through. Grace recovered slowly, physically healing while emotionally withdrawing. She thanked him politely, spoke when necessary. But the warmth was gone. Lily sensed it immediately. "Did you do something bad?" Lily asked him one afternoon in the hallway, swinging her legs from a chair. Ethan knelt in front of her. "I wasn't honest," he said gently. Lily frowned. "Mom says lying hurts more than falling." She wasn't wrong. Ethan slept less. Ate barely anything. For the first time since Emily's death, he felt the old familiar guilt, the kind that presses down until breathing feels like work. On the fourth day, Grace finally spoke more than a sentence. "You could fix everything now," she said quietly, staring out the window. "Pay the bills. Change our lives." "I could," Ethan said. "But I won't, unless you ask me to." She turned sharply. "Why?" "Because the moment I force help on you," he said, "it stops being kindness and becomes control." Grace studied his face. The exhaustion, the fear, the sincerity. Something softened, just slightly. That night, Ethan made arrangements anyway, not payments, but options. Anonymous donations to the hospital's assistance fund. Scholarships earmarked broadly, without names. Safety nets that didn't point back to him. If Grace never forgave him, this would still matter. A week later, Grace was discharged. Ethan packed his few belongings quietly. He didn't assume he was welcome anymore. At the door, Grace stopped him. "You don't have to leave like this," she said. "I think I do," he replied softly. "At least for now." She hesitated. "Lily, she misses you." "I miss her too." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. "Ethan," Grace said finally, voice trembling, "I don't know if I can forgive you yet." He nodded. "That's okay." "But," she took a breath, "I know you didn't have to stay. Or work. Or care." That was the closest thing to grace he'd been given. As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed, a message from his former assistant. Markets shifting. Opportunities waiting. His old life, patient and ready to welcome him back. He turned the phone face down. Because walking away had been easy the first time. Walking away now felt impossible. "So let me ask you, honestly, no right or wrong answer. Could you forgive someone who helped you, but lied about who they were?" Type forgive, if you think you could. Or never, if the wound would cut too deep. Ethan walked down the hospital steps into the late afternoon sun, unsure whether he was leaving behind strangers, or the only family he'd found since everything broke. And just as he reached the sidewalk, he heard Lily's voice behind him. "Mr. Ethan, to wait." Turned. And in her small, outstretched hand, she held something that would change everything. Ethan froze. Lily stood a few steps behind him, cheeks flushed from rushing down the hallway. In her hand was a folded piece of paper, creased and worn at the edges, like it had been opened and closed many times. "You forgot this," she said, holding it up. He didn't recognize it at first. Then he saw the corner, the faint blue ink, the uneven fold. Emily's letter. His throat tightened. "I didn't know I dropped it." Lily nodded solemnly. "Mom says important things don't like being lost." Grace appeared in the doorway behind her, leaning on a crutch. She hadn't planned to come out. He could tell by the way her hair was hastily tied back, the hospital blanket still around her shoulders. "I found it in the room," Grace said softly. Lily read the first line before I could stop her. Ethan's heart pounded. "I'm sorry. That was private." Grace shook her head. She didn't understand the words. Just the feeling. Lily looked up at him. "It says you loved her very much." He knelt slowly, eye level with her. "Yes," he whispered. "More than anything." Lily hesitated, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. The hug was sudden, fierce, absolute. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't realized how badly he needed it until that moment. "She would want you to be happy," Lily said, with the quiet certainty only children carry. Grace watched them, tears sliding freely now. Something inside her finally gave way, not breaking, but bending. "You stayed," Grace said, voice shaking. "You stayed when it was hard. When it didn't benefit you." Ethan stood slowly. "I stayed because you reminded me who I used to be, before I forgot." Grace took a step closer. "You didn't fix things with money. You fixed them with presence." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled receipt, the hospital estimate. "I was angry," she admitted, "because the truth made me feel small. Powerless." She looked up at him. "But the more I thought about it, the more I realized you chose to suffer with us. And that choice mattered." Ethan swallowed. "I don't expect forgiveness." Grace exhaled, long and shaky. "I'm not there yet," she said honestly. "But I don't want you gone." The words landed gently, but they carried weight. They walked out of the hospital together, slowly, carefully. The afternoon sun warmed the concrete, traffic humming in the distance like life continuing, indifferent but steady. Over the next weeks, Ethan didn't disappear. He didn't swoop in with solutions. He showed up. He drove Grace to physical therapy. Sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs. Learned how to help Lily with math homework. Badly at first. He took temporary work again, even when his old accounts unlocked themselves with a single fingerprint. Grace watched all of it. One evening, as Lily slept on the couch, Grace handed Ethan a cup of tea. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked around the small apartment. The mismatched furniture, the cracks in the wall, the life being lived honestly inside it. "Because this is the first place since Emily died where I feel useful," he said. "Not powerful. Just needed." Grace nodded slowly. "That matters." Weeks later, a letter arrived from the hospital. Balance adjusted. Assistance approved. No explanation. Grace looked at Ethan. "Did you?" "No," he said gently. "But I know someone who believes help should be invisible." She smiled, not wide, not perfect, but real. "If this moment gives you even a little hope, if you believe that love can still grow after hurt, comment him. Let's fill this space with hope, because someone reading right now might need to see it more than they know." Spring crept in quietly. Grace walked without crutches. Lily laughed more easily. And Ethan, for the first time in a long while, stopped counting the days by loss. But there was still one truth left to face. Because kindness, once received, has a way of asking something in return. And Ethan knew the final choice was coming. One that would decide not just who he was, but who he would become. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored paper. Grace found it tucked between utility bills and school notices, its weight immediately out of place in their small kitchen. She turned it over twice before opening it, Lily hovering beside her on tiptoes. "Mom, what is it?" Grace read silently, her brow tightening. Then she sat down. "It's an event," she said slowly. "A foundation gala. Formal." Ethan froze where he stood, halfway through rinsing a mug. He already knew what it was. He'd been avoiding this moment for weeks. Grace looked up at him. "Your name is on it." As the host. The room felt suddenly smaller. "I didn't send it here," Ethan said quietly. "I tried to stop it." Grace studied his face. "So this is the world you came from?" "Yes." "And this foundation, it helps people like us?" Ethan nodded. "Hospitals. Single parents. Kids' education. It started years ago, but I never showed up. I just signed checks." Lily's eyes were wide. "You're famous?" Ethan crouched in front of her. "No," he said gently. "Just lucky." Grace leaned back, exhaling slowly. "They want you to stand on a stage," she said. "Be seen." "Yes." "And you want to?" He hesitated. "I think I need to. But not the way they expect." The night of the gala arrived heavy with tension. Grace stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a borrowed dress, hands trembling slightly. Lily twirled beside her, delighted by the simple magic of shiny shoes and soft music drifting up from the street below. Ethan watched them both, heart pounding harder than it ever had in a boardroom. At the venue, crystal lights shimmered above polished floors. Conversations hummed with wealth and confidence. Heads turned when Ethan entered, recognition spreading like a ripple. Grace felt it immediately. The way eyes lingered. The way whispers followed. She reached instinctively for Lily's hand. Ethan noticed. He leaned down. "You don't have to stay," he murmured. Grace met his eyes. "I'm here because I choose to be." When Ethan stepped onto the stage, the room quieted. Applause swelled, automatic and loud. He waited for it to fade. "I was supposed to talk about numbers tonight," he began. "Impact. Growth. Success." The screen behind him lit up, not with charts, but with a photo of a cracked sidewalk under a streetlight. A murmur moved through the crowd. "But I learned something recently," Ethan continued, voice steady but raw. "I learned that the truest measure of a person isn't what they give when they're seen, but what they give when no one knows who they are." Another image appeared, a paper bag with soup. Grace's breath caught. "I went undercover as a poor man," Ethan said plainly. "Not to spy. Not to judge. But to remember." The room was silent now. "I was hungry. Cold. Invisible," he said. "And two people, a mother and her daughter, gave me everything they had. Not knowing my name. Not knowing my worth." He looked directly at Grace and Lily. "They didn't restore my faith with money," he said. "They restored it with kindness." Tears slipped down Grace's cheeks. Lily squeezed her hand. "This foundation will change tonight," Ethan said. "Not in size, but in direction. Every dollar will be guided by lived experience. By voices that know struggle firsthand." He paused. "Including theirs." The applause that followed was different. Slower. Deeper. Later, outside under the city lights, Grace stood quietly beside Ethan. "You didn't use us," she said softly. "You honored us." He shook his head. "You saved me." Lily hugged his waist. "Does this mean we're rich?" Ethan laughed through tears. "No, sweetheart. It means we're enough. If this story reached your heart, please don't scroll away silently. Tap like, not for me, but for the people who carried pain and still chose kindness. One small click can be your way of saying, I felt this. And it mattered." Ethan looked at Grace, at Lily, at the life forming between them. Imperfect, honest, real. And for the first time since he'd lost everything, he knew exactly what he'd been given in return. The weeks after the gala felt quieter, not empty, just calm in a way Grace hadn't known in years. No reporters showed up at the apartment. No cameras waited downstairs. Ethan made sure of that. The foundation redirected funds, policies shifted, but their home stayed small, ordinary, real. And that mattered more than any headline. Grace returned to work part-time, her steps steadier now, pain no longer written into every movement. Lily started bringing home flyers from school, art club, science fair, a field trip she'd never thought they could afford. Ethan listened more than he spoke. He learned the rhythms of their lives, when Grace needed silence, when Lily needed stories, when laughter came easiest and when it didn't come at all. One evening, as the sun spilled gold across the kitchen floor, Grace watched Ethan help Lily with a reading assignment. He stumbled over the voices, making them exaggerated and ridiculous. Lily laughed so hard she slid off her chair. Grace smiled, then felt tears rise unexpectedly. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Grace sat across from Ethan at the table. "I've been thinking," she said. Ethan looked up, suddenly nervous. "That usually means something important." "It is," she said softly. "You didn't come into our lives to rescue us. You came broken. Honest. And you stayed." He swallowed. "I don't want to replace anything you lost." "I know," Grace replied. "But sometimes, people don't replace. They add." Silence stretched between them, not heavy, just full. "I don't forgive you because you're wealthy," she continued. "I forgive you because you learned. And because you let yourself be small." Ethan's eyes filled. "That's more than I deserve." Grace reached across the table and took his hand. Maybe forgiveness isn't about deserve. Months passed. Spring turned to summer. Lily learned to ride a bike. Grace laughed more easily. And Ethan found himself waking each day not with grief pressing on his chest, but with purpose. He didn't move them into something bigger. He didn't rewrite their lives overnight. He simply stayed. On the anniversary of Emily's death, Ethan visited the cemetery alone. He placed flowers gently, then spoke aloud for the first time. "I found my way back," he said quietly. "Not by holding on, but by giving." When he returned, Lily ran to him with a drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a streetlight. "That's us," she said proudly. That night, as the city hummed outside their window, Grace rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Walking away from everything?" Ethan thought of the boardrooms, the towers, the numbers that once defined him. Then he thought of soup in the rain. Rice shared carefully. A child's unguarded trust. "No," he said. "I regret not doing it sooner." Life didn't turn perfect. There were still bills. Still tired days. Still fears that crept in late at night. But there was also warmth. And kindness. And a truth Ethan now lived by every single day. That the richest thing a person can be is trusted. If this story moved you, don't close it quietly. Tap like, not for me but for Grace, for Lily, for anyone who stayed kind even when life made it hard. One small click is your way of saying, "I saw you. I felt you. And your kindness mattered." Ethan looked around the small living room, filled with ordinary sounds and extraordinary love. And he understood the final lesson his journey had given him. Money can change lives. But kindness changes hearts.